Hello there guys, I'm Unstable Voltage and welcome to UV Rambles, a new series that I thought I would try out. Something to give me a little bit of an opportunity to talk about things that are going on within the gaming industry and just to basically vent and let off some steam about what I think. The first video, this one is going to be about the effects of early access on multiplayer games and their lifespan. The game footage in the background is from Chaos Reborn by Snapshot Games, and that does kind of relate to what I'm about to talk about. So, what exactly do I mean by the effect that early access is having on the lifetime of a multiplayer game? Well, first of all, let me just say that I think in general, early access is mostly a good idea. It gives developers the opportunity to put their game on sale a little bit early before it's finished. It allows people who really want to play that game and are willing to overlook the fact that it's not complete to actually invest into it and be able to play it early. It also allows the developer to gain some additional income, which they can use to support themselves while they continue to make the game. It allows them to load test servers, it allows them to sort out balance issues, it allows them to collect statistics and feedback from the player base in order to make the game a better experience. So in general, I think early access is good. Of course there are the downsides. There are plenty of games that pop up on early access in a really poor and unplayable state. Some of these games remain in early access for years and years, and when they do eventually come out, sometimes they're full of bugs, not completed. There's been quite a few games that have either been totally abandoned or they just slap 1.0 on it, put it out the door in a half-finished state and it never gets touched again. So there are definitely some bad sides to early access, but on the whole, I think it's a good thing. But I've been talking with quite a few different people recently, just some friends, also people in the industry. I've been speaking to a few developers, including a man with a lot of experience in the industry, Mr. Julian Gollop, responsible for XCOM and of course Chaos Reborn that you're watching in the background. And the basic topic has been that whenever you've got a game that is either completely multiplayer focused or has a high focus on multiplayer, the player base will make or break the game. You can have the best multiplayer game in the world, but if there's nobody else playing it and you don't have anybody to play with, then it's not very likely to be successful or last a long time on the shelves. Take a look at Evolve, for example. It was a very, very expensive AAA game, and even to this day it's still quite expensive to buy. It's not really that heavily discounted. There's a lot of DLC for it, which is still quite expensive. Even at peak times at the moment, the highest concurrent players on Steam is around about 600 to 700 players a day. That game is dead. It's actually dying on its arse right now. And on new people really likely to spend £30 to £40, which is like $60, to buy a game which has no single player mode, or at least not one that's worthy of speaking of. You can play the multiplayer version of it against bots, but it doesn't have a campaign or anything like that. Is somebody really going to pay £40 or $60 to buy a game that is 98% multiplayer, but there's no one there to play with? Or at least if you do find someone to play with, you're going to end up playing with the same small group of people every day, unless you have your own group of 4 other friends who all have the game and you all play together. That's about the only way you're really going to make this work. And this is not just a problem with AAA games, it affects indies and everything in between. That if you have a game that is focused on multiplayer and there's nobody playing, it's really going to hurt sales. Because people these days, if they're buying a multiplayer game, not everyone will, but there are a huge number of people that will do the research and go, well, hang on, just how many people are playing this game? How am I likely to get a match? Will I actually have people to play with? What sort of times are they going to be on? Is the player base located in a particular time zone? I live in Australia, whereas the rest of... I don't, by the way, I live in the UK. This is just musing. Someone who lives in Australia might say, for example, well, this particular game, most of the player base is either in North America or Europe, so no one's going to be on playing at the times I'm on playing. So there's lots of considerations that people do have to put into a multiplayer game before they jump into it. Now, whenever a game comes out on its release, normally, and you'd hope that it'll have a big marketing push, and on day one it gets quite a lot of sales, and over the first couple of weeks there's a huge influx of people. you very often expect that when you buy a game on day one, that the multiplayer side of things isn't going to be perfect. If it's a small indie game, you probably find that the initial influx of sales is quite slow, so therefore it might take a week or two before there is a decent player base to play multiplayer. If it's a game that has a single player element and a multiplayer element, you might find that there's a good number of people who are just playing the single player because they want to get a little bit of practice in, they want to get a little bit of experience in there, and it just means that it can take a little bit of time before you can actually get a multiplayer game. Then if you take AAA games, and again, if we're looking at something that's very much multiplayer focused, if we look like Call of Duty or Battlefield, for example, you might find that on day one, you can't even get online for a multiplayer game because the servers are being so hammered with the huge number of people that go on there. And I must admit, even though these games are primarily multiplayer and hardly anybody plays the single player elements of Call of Duty and Battlefield 4 and things like that, I still do. And the reason for that is when I get a new Call of Duty game, or I have migrated to Battlefield now, when I get a new Battlefield game, I like to play through the campaign because, one, on day one, the servers are usually a little bit gnarly with lots of disconnects and thousands, if not millions of people trying to connect, which is a real pain. But playing through the campaign gives me the opportunity to make sure that my game settings are good so that I get decent performance while the quality is still good. It allows me to fine-tune my controls, like my mouse sensitivity, make sure all my key bindings are in good places. It allows me to get used to the different weapons in the game, the recall mechanics and things like that. So even though I buy these games for the multiplayer, I probably won't play the multiplayer for a week or two after the initial release. But what my concern is, when a game comes out in early access, especially if it's an indie game, which of course will usually have far fewer players than a AAA game, is that you're actually diluting your audience, because what tends to happen, especially with early access, is somebody will buy into it at a very early point, and then they will either become bored with the game because they've played it so much that they've done with it before it's even finished. Or in some cases they'll look at the game and they won't be happy with what they're playing because they are playing an unfinished game and there are features missing, they're not getting the most out of it. And what they tend to do then is just sort of, I'll put it on the back burner, I'll forget about it now, go and play something else, and I'll come back to this when it's more developed, or I'll come back to this when it's been completed. But unfortunately a lot of people just forget about it. Once it's actually out of their mind and they've stopped playing it, they've gone on to the next game and they've forgotten about it. Now, if you have a game that's in early access for a short period of time, it's probably not going to be all that big a deal. But when you have a game that is in early access for maybe a year or more, you really start sort of stretching the limits to how you're going to hang on to those players. Because think about it, how many games these days, unless it's something really, really big and popular or something really, really niche, how many games actually keep people playing for an entire year in any significant numbers? Just stop and think about that for a moment. There's very, very few games, even games that generally tend to be popular. And if we look at big things again like Call of Duty and Battlefield, they tend to get new versions or very heavy expansions every 12 months or so. They're always refreshing the franchise and renewing it, because the number of people playing the last one starts to dwindle. And if you are producing an indie game that is multiplayer only or very heavily multiplayer focused, if you've already had a good chunk of the player base come and go before the game even launches, it means that when people buy into that, they're going to be stopping and thinking, well, hang on a minute, am I actually going to have anyone to play with? How long a shelf life is this game going to have? And especially if it's a multiplayer based game where the developers are paying for the hosting of the game servers. Because if nobody's playing the game, and of course that's going to, as a knock-on effect, hurt sales, that developer may turn around and say, well, we're just going to pull the plug. There's no point as paying for continued development of the back end and paying for the hosting of the servers and the renting of the hardware and the bandwidth and the electricity and the air conditioning systems for the server rooms, all of the expenses that go to hosting a server. If there's nobody playing, then they're making a loss on that and they're going to pull the plug. And it is nice that there are some developers who have said, well, you know, we've set a budget aside, we're going to support our servers for X number of years into the future regardless. That's great, and it's good that things like that happen, and it certainly needs to. But my concern is that when we start seeing more multiplayer-focused games coming into early access, that because the player base is being so diluted over a long period of time, when the game actually finally releases, there's going to be very, very few people playing, or at least significantly less than would be playing if everybody bought the game on day one. Of course, I could be totally wrong here. Let's just bear in mind for a second that when a game goes into early access, it doesn't necessarily get a lot of publicity, a lot of advertising. Yes, it may get the odd article on a website, or it might appear in a magazine, and it might get shared around through social media, Facebook, Twitter, etc. So people will find out about it, and some people will go and buy it in early access. Some people might just stumble upon it on the Steam page. So some people will buy into it. But I'm not really aware of any company doing a real hard marketing push on a game in early access, unless it's like a very clever marketing ploy that some of the AAAs do and things like that. For most indie developers who have little to no budget for marketing anyway, they pretty much just rely on word of mouth and social media to get the word out during the development phase. And any money that they do have put aside for marketing, and any people, any contacts they have in the industry that they can use to get them a review or an article in a magazine or published on a website, they will usually leave those markers and call them in when the game is actually launched and finished, which is completely understandable. So I still suspect that even when a game is in early access, even if it's been in early access for like 3 years, that there's still going to be a huge number of people who have no idea it exists until the day that it actually launches and the marketing push goes out there and goes, hey, look, we've got a new game. So I still expect that there will be a big influx of players on day one for, you know, pretty much any multiplayer focused game. No matter how long it's been in early access, there will be a big influx on day one. But I still think a lot of those people are going to be looking at the multiplayer numbers. If the game has a single player element, or if the game mostly focuses on single player, it doesn't really matter. You could be the only person in the world playing it. If it's a really, really good single player game, and it's a game that you want to play, you're not going to be put off by how many other people are or aren't playing it. It makes no difference. It's just when it's a multiplayer game, or primarily a multiplayer game. So this is something that that can be a little bit concerning. So the question is really, what can developers do to sort of stop this problem from happening? Well, I think the first thing to do is obviously try and keep your early access periods as short as possible. I'm not saying the game should be rushed, but the quicker you can get the game finished and out of the door, the less player attrition you're going to get during that development period. But it's not just about that. I don't think it's a case of trying to get the game finished more quickly. I think it's more important to bring your game to early access later. Don't come to early access when you've got a game that has little to no content. And we can go back to Chaos Reborn here, again, that you're watching in the background. This is a game that has a multiplayer element and a single player element. But when it came to early access, it didn't have the single player element at all. It only had the multiplayer. And yes, the multiplayer game has sort of chopped and changed a bit during the time it's been in early access, because it's constantly being tweaked and worked on and built upon, which is fantastic. But when it first came out, it was multiplayer only. And this served two great purposes. First of all, because there was no single player, it was pretty much forcing everyone who was playing it to play multiplayer. And this is great in early access for a multiplayer game, because the developer can pick up statistics such as any balance issues. When you're looking at a game like this where it's a tactical game, you can actually monitor each match. You can see how many matches have been played, won, lost or drawn, what the average length of each match is. If anyone's playing any particular spells or tactics or cards or whatever that seem to be winning more often than others, you can look at it and go, well, hang on, every time someone plays this card, they seem to win the game. Maybe we need to address that issue and rebalance this. So it's a great way to collect those sort of statistics. Of course, if you release a game that is single player, or single player and multiplayer, you might find that not many people are playing the multiplayer side of it. They're all playing single player, and it's very, very difficult for you to test server loads, very difficult for you to test the back end, and difficult for you to collect statistics and things like that. So that is one thing that can be done. And of course it does make sense in certain games, because you don't really want to build the single player and build all the AI and everything like that until you've actually got the mechanics locked down, which is very, very easy to do in the multiplayer. But I just think it's important that developers stop and think. I can imagine that there's a huge temptation to get a game onto early access as soon as possible, because the faster you get it onto early access, the faster you can actually start selling copies. And I'm not saying that that's a bad thing. I can completely understand why developers want to do that. It's a very, very expensive thing to make a game, and it takes a long time. And the developers have to be paid. If it takes 1, 2 or 3 years to make a game, those developers have to have enough money coming in to pay their wages. They have to pay rent and lighting and all of the other utility bills for the offices that they're in. They probably have to outsource some work to other people like musicians and freelance artists and things like that. Then they've got to pay for their software, all the licensing fees for the programs that they use to create the game. If they're making games for consoles, they've got the Sony's fees and Microsoft's fees for producing the games for their consoles and things like that. So there's a lot of overheads. And the last thing you want is for a development studio to run out of money partway through making a game and then either have to release it with features missing, releasing it early just so they can get it on sale, or just abandoning the project altogether. So I can completely understand why there is an urge for developers to want to get their game out as soon as possible. I haven't got a problem with that at all. But I do think you really need to consider, as a developer, what exactly your game is going to have when you release it to early access, because that's what's going to make or break the game. If you release a game on early access that doesn't have half of the features, and the features that are there are broken, and it doesn't matter if you turn around and go, well, hang on, it's early access, alpha is alpha, you know, that we've told you that things aren't going to work. At the end of the day, you're charging somebody to play your game. And if you're going to charge them, you can't hide behind the caveat of it's not finished yet. We understand that. But if you think that it's in a suitable condition to release and sell, there's got to be something there. You can't sell a non-working product even if it's non-finished. People are going to accept there's content missing. People are going to expect that there's bugs. People are going to expect that there's placeholders in there. But people are still going to expect to be able to play the game that you've presented them. So just think about what content you're going to add to the game and in what order, and make sure you've got something of value there to keep the player base interested. You don't want players to get fatigued. I'll put my hands up and I'll admit that I'm a terrible gamer. I buy so many games, even brand new AAA games when they've launched, at full price, $60. I'll play them for a week and then I'll forget about them and move on to something else. And that will be a big title that I've been looking forward to, like The Witcher 3. I was looking forward to The Witcher 3 for ages, months and months and months. It was on my wish list. I was sitting there. I had it pre-installed on Steam. The second that it launched, I logged in and I was playing. I played that game in the first week for about, I don't know, 30 hours, and I haven't touched it since. And that's pretty much the pattern that seems to follow me around with all games. So I've also bought into a lot of early access games. And what I desperately try to do is when I get an early access game, I'll dip in every now and then. I'll spend half an hour just having a look around. How does this work? What have they done? What have they been working on? What have they added? What's changed? But I generally won't play it because I don't want to spoil myself on the alpha or the beta before the game is actually launched and finished. Now, that's my own personal preference. But there are people that won't do that. There are people who will buy early access, they will play it and play it and play it for a couple of weeks, and then they'll go, okay, I think I've had my money's worth of that, I'm done. Or they will go, I don't like this, there's bits missing, this doesn't work properly, it's spoiling my experience, I'll come back later. And then they forget, because inevitably the game doesn't release for another 12 months, and they've found 100 other games in the meantime. So that's just my little rant about multiplayer and how I think that early access could possibly be the death of multiplayer games if they're not handled right. And I really hope that you know, developers either are aware of this or they start to think about it in the future, especially if they do make multiplayer focused games, because I must admit the majority of the games that I play do tend to be single player. The vast majority are. But there are more and more multiplayer games coming out. There are more and more multiplayer games that I'm investing into, and more that I'm getting interested in. And I don't want to see them die off because they're not handled correctly. Of course, it's quite possible that over the next couple of years, they could be a complete paradigm shift and the way that early access works could completely change. Who knows? You know, this is a very fickle industry where fads and trends change from one week to the next almost, so we could see something completely different in the future. But that's just my little rant on multiplayer in early access. So let me know what you think, guys. Either just drop it in the comments, or you know, send me a message on Twitter if you've got any sort of insight into this. If it's something that you're interested in, if you've got your own opinions, by all means let me know. It's something we can talk about and something we can consider. But until next time, thanks for watching. I'll see you on the next video, and until then, goodbye for now.